Hello and you're very welcome here. My name is Aisling and I'm here today to talk about books. Particularly today we are going to do the mid-year freakout book tag. As ever, I'm a little bit behind a lot of people, but I wanted to wait for sure for June to be over to know that I would be finished reading as many books as I was going to finish in June, which I did. I did finish a book just on the last day of June. So I was quite pleased with that. I read this year so far 48 books. Not that I feel as though quantity is all that important with reading. I have noticed as the years have gone on, I have just kind of fallen into reading that little bit more. It has become such a huge part of my life now. Naturally, I have a booktube channel now. Who would have thunk it, right? I kind of keep seeing people who are disappointed with themselves because they haven't read enough, and I just feel always it should be quality over quantity, and it's okay to do things that aren't reading. Hobbies should be enjoyable and not just about like getting the next thing in all the time. And I always advocate a slow life. I advocate slow living. I advocate taking your time. I advocate naps and just doing what you want to do. Capitalism kills and you don't need to be productive all the time. So take a rest. You don't need to read all that much. It's okay. And with that rant aside, we're going to get into it. So the first question that I have is, what was the best book that you've read so far this year? And me being me, I have a couple answers for this. Well, actually more than a couple. I have 3 answers for this. I have 3 quite different books, but there's 3 books that I have given 5 stars to so far this year. I'm not a big 5-star giver because I just feel like 5 stars for me should be kept aside for something that absolutely just blows me away. So maybe the books this year that I've given 5 stars are a little bit different than maybe what I might normally give 5 stars to, but I did enjoy them and I feel like each of them, to their own merit, just for me, deserve 5 stars. So the first 5 stars that I gave this year, I think, was my beloved Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. So we follow Viv, and she is an orc, and she decides that she doesn't want to live the bandit life anymore. She's done with taking jobs to go out and murder and slaughter. She wants to open a nice little coffee shop, and that's it. That's what it is. I love the tagline on this because it is exactly what it is. So it's high fantasy, low stakes, and good company. There is a small amount of tension in this book, but like you always know that you're safe, and it's just a nice time. And by the time I finished it, I was like, look, I just enjoyed this so much that I had to give it 5 stars. And I have no regrets. I still think about it. I still love it. And that's my first one. So my next one is a completely different book. It's by one of my new favourite authors, who is an Irish author. It is Claire Keegan, and the next book that I gave 5 stars to was Foster. So Foster is a very, very short book, 88 pages. It's a novella, I guess. And we follow a young girl who is sent by her parents over the summer to stay with some distant relatives while her mum is preparing to have yet another baby. We are never told why she is sent over her other siblings. There's only 88 pages, so there's not, you know, not everything is tied up, but you get enough information. There's something so solidly about this book. It, for me, is so nostalgic about being in my grandmother's house in the countryside in Ireland, like around kind of a lot of fields and a lot of farms. And so this girl is on a farm with distant relatives, and we can tell by her behaviour that maybe there has been a little bit of difficulty or tension at home. We can tell by the conversations. It is so Irish. It is so inherently Irish. And a lot of the time I find myself hiding away from reading Irish books because they're so typically like Irish and chop of the day, you know, and a lot of the time I read for escapism, but there's something I found so wonderfully beautiful and serene, but also heartbreaking in this book. And I would really recommend the film as well on Colleen Keown, or The Quiet Girl. It's filmed in Irish. which I think is great. I loved this book and I could not give it 5 stars. And my next one was just an epic fantasy. So it was the sequel to The Poppy War. It was The Dragon Republic, and let me tell you, this book just for me had everything. High fantasy, high stakes, bit of magic, great characters, great characterization, great setting, great, you know, just the magic system. And I think sometimes with a sequel, with a fantasy novel, like the first one, you're like, oh my god, there's so much information, I have to figure out this world, I don't know what's going on, I don't know who these characters are, you know, and you're kind of like getting to learn everything. And I feel like with this, there is some of that, but you're already in the world, you already know what's going on. And it just, from the get-go, had such boom, boom, boom. There was always something, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And I absolutely loved it. I just had to give it 5 stars again. So those are my 3 5-star books for 2023. Hopefully they are not the only 5-star books for 2023. So the next question is actually, what's the best sequel that you read so far this year? And I know I'm doubling up, but I'm going to give that to The Dragon Republic as well. So the next question is a new release that you haven't read this year but you want to. Okay, so last year I absolutely went mad engaging with Bookstagram and Booktube and bought so many new books and then didn't read all that many of them. So this year I have been kind of trying to make an effort to read those books, but also to read kind of backlist books and to not get so caught up in the hype of new books. Because again, capitalism kills, yo. So the book that I have chosen that I really want to read but haven't gotten around to yet, I have it on my Kindle, that is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I know that there are some people that have been really disappointed by this book, but I'm really excited about the concept of it. I'm really looking forward to it. Apparently it really kind of elevates this idea of learning and academia, and I love books to do with academia. I love academic settings. I also love books about fairies. They also give me such nostalgia from when I was a kid and used to love wandering around my grandmother's fields and forest looking for fairies. And I'm just really looking forward to this because I love also kind of a book that's just quite cozy, that just is a little bit of a warm hug. I do love books that like absolutely blow my mind, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I just like something that feels a little bit nostalgic and like it's not gonna hurt me. So that's my answer for that one. My next question is my most anticipated release for the rest of the year. I'm gonna give that to Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. So it is the follow-up or the partner book to my beloved Legends and Lattes. And I actually don't know a whole lot about it, but if there's anything that I love more than coffee, which is a lot of things because I'm not a huge coffee drinker, but it is books. Surprise, surprise. So I'm really looking forward to something that's a bit more low stakes, cozy fantasy by Travis Baldree, set kind of in the same universe. So hopefully that won't disappoint, but honestly it has a lot to live up to for me personally. Okay, so my biggest disappointments for this year, I'm not going to spend too long talking about them because I don't want to be a whinge bag, and I know that people absolutely love these books. So the first one I'm going to mention is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I was really excited to read this book for such a long time and eventually got around to it, was reading it, just found it felt a little bit flat for me. It was claustrophobic, but not claustrophobic enough. I felt like the world wasn't expanded upon enough. And then the reveal about what was going on in this house just didn't do it for me. But I know that a lot of people love it, so absolutely give it a go if you feel like you like a gothic read. And the other book that just I found quite disappointing was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I feel like I'm going through a bit of a serious fantasy buzz this year. There's no I feel like about it. I definitely am. So as somebody who usually reads a lot of contemporary fiction and a lot of literary fiction, this year I've just gone a bit mad for fantasy, and I just love kind of young adult fantasy because it's just quite fun generally. But again, there was something about The Cruel Prince that the characters I just didn't gel with. The setting, the location, the stakes, just the whole thing. It just wasn't for me. And again, I know it is such a beloved book, but I will not be continuing with that series. So I passed it on and put it in one of my little free libraries nearby, and it was snapped up pretty quickly. So hopefully whoever got it loves it. And my biggest surprise for this year. So I had one reading goal for this year, and that reading goal was to read one book in particular. And I still feel weird to say that I have read this book because I kind of thought that I never would. So that is War and Peace by Mr. Leo Tolstoy. This book is gigantic. I think there's about 1,300 pages in this book. So firstly, what surprised me was that I finished the book, because myself and classics may not have the best relationship. And there were things in this book that I didn't like. The war campaigns, like obviously this book is set during a war. It is War and Peace. The war campaigns were often very arduous, very almost textbooky. Just so difficult for me to focus on, just not something that I'm generally interested in. But what I found so surprising about this book was that it was so readable. There was so much philosophy in it. Tolstoy had a lot of words, but he had a lot to say about things that are really quite profound. Now, he repeated them a lot, but look, Russian classics, hey. But what I found was that I fell in love with so many of the characters, particularly Prince Andrei and Natasha. I loved them. I think about them regularly. So I just wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to find this book quite a slog. And don't get me wrong, I did in parts. But I'm really surprised by the fact that I did enjoy it. And at the end of it, I was like, that was a damn good book. Will I read it again? I will not. I will never read this book again. I'm not generally a rereader anyway, but for me, I found it a bit difficult, and it made me feel a little bit stupid at times because I didn't have the historical and contextual background that maybe I should have had. I think that would have made it a little bit of an easier read, but for the most part, I just was amazed at how intricate the relationships were, how much I rooted for people, how much I hated other people. And I thought I would kind of feel a little bit like kind of flat about it and just read it and be like, oh, I read War and Peace. But I read and for the most part enjoyed War and Peace, which for me is quite the surprise. Okay, so my new favourite author for this year. So the book that I just finished reading on the last day of June was The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I read this book, which was over 1,000 pages. I read it in 8 days, I think. I tore through it. I loved it. The story is woven together so intricately. The magic systems in it, the characters, oh my god, the characters, the character growth, the twists and turns, the investment I had in these characters, the setting, the history, the lore, oh my god, how did this come out of one man's brain? But not only how did this come out of one man's brain, how did so many books come out of one man's brain, all set in the Cosmere. I am so excited to read more Brandon Sanderson. I maybe shouldn't have started with The Way of Kings. From kind of reading a bit more about Brandon Sanderson and watching some more videos about him, maybe I should have started with the Mistborn series. So I may go back and start The Final Empire and work my way that way rather than continuing on with the Stormlight books. But who knows, we'll see. But I will say that as somebody who is relatively new to epic fantasy, I loved Brendan Sanderson's writing. I loved that book, and I feel like we are blessed to have authors like that roaming the planet right now. So with that then, my next question is my newest fictional crush. I am not somebody who tends to get like crushes on book characters, but I do really like Cell from the Legendborn series. I read Bloodmarked this year as well, the sequel to Legendborn, and I like Cell's character. He's quite grumpy, he puts it all out there, he's quite emotional, he's a bit of a pain in the backside, but I really like him. There's something about him, you know. He's not the main love interest, and the main love interest, I'm like, I don't know, he's a bit of an asshole, but with very few redeeming qualities, I think. So yeah, but really, again, coming back to Brandon Sanderson, Jasna. So there's a lady called Jasna in this, and she is an academic. She is a badass woman. She is independent. She is traveling. She is studying. She takes no shit. She doesn't care if people don't like her. She is where she is to do a job, and she just takes absolutely zero shit, and I love her for it. She's definitely one of my new favourite characters. Alongside, you know, my next question anyway is, my newest favourite characters, and Jasna absolutely, but also Kaladin from the same book, Way of Kings. He is a slave, and he doesn't allow that to bring him down. Now, there are points in this book where he gets very, very low, but he essentially carries a group of people who feel like they have very little to live for, and he teaches them about the small joys, about hope, about empathy, and he is just such a great guy. So I'm looking forward to reading more of Kaladin and Jasna for sure. My next question is a book that made me cry this year, and let me tell you, I am usually a big crier when it comes to media, consuming media, and my favourite books tend to be books that make me bawl my eyes out. Standard. But there was only one book this year that I could think of that really made me shed a tear, and that was The Anthropocene, reviewed by our own very John Green. Our very own John Green even. Excuse my brain. And particularly just because there was an essay in this that had to do with living with chronic pain. And that particular essay really hit home. I listened to it on audio, and it got into my ribcage, and I did shed a tear over that. But I feel like it's that kind of thing, you know, when you're going through something and then somebody manages to vocalize how you're feeling and how it is, and to accept and to make you feel seen. Just that feeling of, oh, maybe I'm not alone. So that made me shed a bit of a tear. And I think, to be honest, I looked through my Goodreads of all the books that I read this year, and I think that was the only one, surprisingly enough. And okay, so the next question that I have is a book that made me happy, and it's a book that I have already mentioned. It is Legendborn, the first book in the Legendborn trilogy. So we follow a girl named Bree, where she goes to pre-college with her friend, and she gets caught up in this kind of underground society, and there's a lot of magic, there's a lot of representation, there's queer representation, there's a lot of kind of racial elements to this, and they're done really well because our main character is a black girl, and we see so many of the kind of microaggressions that she deals with in her daily life. So that was really great, and I think that's really done well, and it's also done really well in the second book. The characters are great. The setting is great. Again, I love an academic setting, so like for me this book just feels like it had everything. There was so much intrigue, it moved really fast, it was a bit of fun. I just liked it. It made me quite happy even in the worst moments. Just the fact that this book exists made me quite happy. So there's that. And we're getting close to the end, you'll be glad to know. So the most beautiful book that I bought this year, I reckon for me that has to go to A Day of Fall and Night by Samantha Shannon. I just think it is absolutely stunning, and that's all I'm going to say about that. I haven't read it yet. So okay, and then books that you really need to read by the end of the year. I don't like the word need in here because again, we don't need to read if we're reading for fun. But books that I would like to read by the end of the year. First one is The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu, and this is a science fiction book. I don't know too much about it and I kind of want to leave it that way. I hear it's a bit of a heavier read. I am not a huge sci-fi reader, so I want to be able to read this and take my time with it, and the Netflix adaptation is coming out in January, so this is why I would really like to get around to this book by the end of this year. The next book, which may surprise you as somebody who loves to cry while reading, I have not read this book yet and it has been on my shelf for a long time. I did read part of it. I found it in the library a few years ago before I'd heard anything about it, and I just picked it up. I was like, oh, this sounds like it could be good. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I haven't read it and I really want to, but I picked it up from the library a few years ago, read maybe, I don't know, like a third of it, and I do remember some instances in it in which it was starting to kind of get a little bit darker, but I was enjoying the representation of friendship and that sort of thing in this book. But unfortunately somebody had a hold on it and I had to bring it back and I didn't finish it, and thus I bought it again to have a couple of years ago, but I still haven't gotten around to reading it. And I know people laud it as trauma porn, and I know people say, you know, you shouldn't read it because it's that upsetting, but it's just one of those books that I know that I'm going to read, and I imagine, knowing my own reading tastes, I will really enjoy it as much as you can enjoy something that's really difficult and traumatic. But that's another one I'm hoping to get to by the end of the year. And the last one is a book by Mark Lawrence called, what is it called? The Book That Wouldn't Burn. Again, I love books that are set in an academic setting or in libraries or books about books. I just love that sort of thing. I eat that up. I love books about studying, you know, I love characters that love academia as well. And I actually don't know too much about this anyway. I've heard, again, very mixed reviews about this, but I personally am looking forward to it. So I'll read the blurb, it's very short. So Evar has lived his whole life trapped within a vast library older than empires and larger than cities. Levera has spent hers in a tiny settlement out on the dust where nightmares stalk and no one goes. The world has never noticed them, and that's about to change. So that is all I know about that book. So quite little really. I know that it's a fantasy and I am looking forward to getting to it sometime soon. No pressure. And that's that. So I wonder, do you have any thoughts, questions, comments or opinions about the books that I have mentioned in this video? If you do, drop me a comment, let me know, connect with me on Instagram, connect with me on Goodreads or Storygraph. They are all linked below in the description box. If you liked this kind of content, please do give me a subscribe. Please do like this video, get in touch. I really love when people comment, just to know that there are other people out there that are as book nerdy as I am. As usual, as ever, I really hope you're minding yourself. I hope you're taking it handy. And I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye bye.